April 29, 2004, Lansing, Michigan. While the rest of the world moved forward into the digital age, a quiet tragedy was unfolding inside the Lansing car assembly plant. The air was thick with the scent of oil and heavy hearts. On this day, the last of over 35 million vehicles rolled off the line. It wasn't a roaring muscle car or a chrome-heavy cruiser of the 50s. It was a simple, compact sedan, an Alero, signed by the workers who had spent their lives building a legend. With that final turn of the key, a 107-year-old pulse stopped. Oldsmobile wasn't just a car brand, it was the foundation of the American automotive industry. It gave us the assembly line, the automatic transmission, and the muscle car. It was the rocket that powered the American dream. So how does a company that sold over 1 million cars a year in the 1980s find itself on the chopping block just 2 decades later? Did Oldsmobile fail the world, or did the world leave Oldsmobile behind? This is the epic story of the rise, the glory, and the ultimate fall of Oldsmobile. To understand Oldsmobile, you have to understand its place in the slowness hierarchy of General Motors. If Chevrolet was for the everyman and Cadillac was for the elite, Oldsmobile was the innovation division. Throughout its history, Oldsmobile occupied a unique middle-tier status. It was the brand for the aspiring professional, the engineer, the doctor, the successful suburbanite. But more than status, Oldsmobile represented progress. It was GM's laboratory. If a new technology was risky, it was tested on an Olds first. From the first mass-produced gasoline car to the first turbocharged production engine, Oldsmobile lived in the future while its competitors were still catching up to the present. The story begins with one man, Ransom Eli Olds. Born in 1864 in Geneva, Ohio, Ransom was a born tinkerer. He spent his childhood in his father's machine shop in Lansing, Michigan, obsessed with the idea of a horseless carriage. By 1887, he had built a steam-powered car, but he knew the future lay in gasoline. On August 21, 1897, with financial backing from lumber magnate Samuel L. Smith, he founded the Olds Motor Works. But success wasn't immediate. The early years were a struggle of trial and error. In 1899, the company merged with his father's engine business to become Olds Motor Works. They moved to Detroit, into the first factory ever built specifically for automobile production. Then, disaster struck. In March 1901, a fire tore through the Detroit plant. It burned the factory to the ground, destroying nearly every prototype the company had. Everything was lost, except for one small, single-cylinder runabout with a unique curved front. 2 workers managed to push it out of the burning building just in time. That car was the curved-dash Oldsmobile. And that fire, ironically, was the spark that changed history.
Because the fire had destroyed their ability to manufacture specialized parts, Ransom Olds did something revolutionary. He outsourced. He contracted the Dodge brothers for transmissions and Henry Leland for engines. To put these parts together quickly, he pioneered the progressive assembly line. While history often credits Henry Ford with this invention, it was Ransom Olds who first used a stationary line to mass-produce the curved dash. In 1901, they built 425 cars. By 1904, they were producing over 5,000. The curved dash became a cultural phenomenon. It was the subject of the 1905 hit song, "In My Merry Oldsmobile," a tune that would stay synonymous with the brand for a century. Oldsmobile was the best-selling car in America. But as the company grew, so did the friction. Ransom Olds wanted to keep building small, affordable cars. His investors, led by Samuel Smith's son, Frederick, wanted to build high-end luxury vehicles. In 1904, Ransom Eli Olds walked away from his own company. He would go on to found REO, the namesake of the band REO Speedwagon, but his first child, Oldsmobile, was about to enter a new family. In 1908, a man named Billy Durant bought the struggling Olds Motor Works and made it the second pillar of his brand-new conglomerate, General Motors.
If the first 40 years of Oldsmobile were about proving the automobile could work, the next 40 were about proving it could fly. As America emerged from the shadow of World War II, a new spirit of optimism took hold. The country was obsessed with the sky, with jet engines, and with speed. Oldsmobile didn't just follow this trend, they fueled it. In 1949, they released an engine that would change the automotive landscape forever, the Rocket V8. Before 1949, most American engines were flatheads, reliable but limited in power. Oldsmobile's engineers, led by the legendary Charles Kettering, developed the first mass-produced, high-compression, overhead valve V8. It was compact, efficient, and, for its time, terrifyingly fast. They dropped this 303 cubic inch masterpiece into the lightweight body of the Oldsmobile 76 and called it the Oldsmobile 88. The result? The world's first muscle car formula. Big engine, small car. The 88 dominated NASCAR, winning 10 out of 19 races in 1950. It became the king of the dirt tracks. But the Rocket's influence went beyond the track. It entered the very soul of American culture. In 1951, Jackie Brenston and his Delta Cats recorded Rocket 88, a song many music historians cite as the first ever rock and roll record. Oldsmobile wasn't just a car anymore. It was a lifestyle. It was the sound of the 1950s. By the 1960s, Oldsmobile was GM's technology division. While Chevy was for the masses and Cadillac for the wealthy, Oldsmobile was for the dreamers. In 1966, they did something no American manufacturer had dared to do in decades. They brought back front-wheel drive. The Oldsmobile Tornado was a mechanical marvel. With its unitized power package, it managed to fit a massive 425 cubic inch V8 and a heavy-duty transmission entirely over the front wheels. It looked like a spaceship and drove like a train. It won Motor Trend's Car of the Year and proved that Oldsmobile engineers were the smartest guys in Detroit. But the dreamers also wanted to go fast. To compete with the Pontiac GTO, Olds unleashed the 442. The name was a code: 4-barrel carburetor, 4-speed manual transmission, and 2 exhausts. By 1960, with the 455 cubic inch W30 package, the 442 became the gentleman's muscle car. It was fast enough to humiliate a Hemi Cuda on the weekend, but refined enough to take to church on Sunday. This was Oldsmobile at its zenith, sophisticated, powerful, and utterly unique. In the mid-1980s, General Motors was the most powerful corporation on Earth, but it was suffering from a terminal case of corporate sameness. For decades, the Sloan ladder worked because each brand had its own soul, its own engines, and its own look. But as GM tried to cut costs, they began a process called badge engineering. Suddenly, an Oldsmobile was just a Buick with a different grille and a higher price tag. The innovation division had lost its laboratory. The first major blow to the brand's prestige actually happened at the height of its success. In 1977, Oldsmobile couldn't keep up with the massive demand for its Rocket V8 engines. Without telling customers, GM began installing Chevrolet 350 engines into Oldsmobile Delta 88s. When owners discovered they had a Chevy under the hood, they were outraged. To the Oldsmobile faithful, the Rocket engine was the car.
This led to massive class action lawsuits and a permanent stain on the brand's reputation. It was the first sign that the rocket was being phased out by corporate accountants. In 1984, GM leadership made a fateful decision. They reorganized the company, stripping Oldsmobile of its independent engineering and design departments. Oldsmobile became a marketing arm rather than a manufacturer. They no longer built their own engines. They no longer designed their own chassis. They were now competing with their siblings, Buick and Pontiac, for the same parts in the same bins. By the late 80s, the innovation division had nothing new to offer except a nameplate. As sales began to slide, Oldsmobile panicked. Their average buyer was getting older, and the brand was seen as stodgy. In 1988, they launched one of the most famous and most disastrous marketing campaigns in history. This is not your father's Oldsmobile. It was a double-edged sword that cut the wrong way. The slogan insulted their loyal, older customer base by telling them their taste was out of date. Meanwhile, the younger generation, the ones buying BMWs, Hondas, and the new Lexus, didn't believe the hype. To them, it was exactly like their father's Oldsmobile, just with a confusing commercial. Sales plummeted. In 1985, they sold over 1 million cars. By 1992, that number had dropped to 400,000. By the mid-90s, the writing was on the wall. GM executives were openly discussing closing the division. In a final, desperate Hail Mary, Oldsmobile was given one last chance to innovate. The result was the 1995 Oldsmobile Aurora. The Aurora was a revelation. It didn't look like any other GM car. It was built on a chassis so stiff it broke GM's testing equipment. It had a high-tech North Star-derived V8 and an interior that rivaled European luxury sedans. But there was a catch. GM was so afraid of the Oldsmobile name's baggage that they barely put the brand's name on the car. The Aurora was a critical success, but a commercial tragedy. It was too little, too late. Oldsmobile's traditional middle management buyer had moved on. They weren't looking for a chrome-laden cruiser. They wanted the precision of Japanese engineering or the prestige of German performance. Oldsmobile was caught in a no-man's land, too expensive to compete with Toyota, but not prestigious enough to compete with Lexus. By the 1999, despite a lineup of modern-looking cars like the Intrigue and the Alero, the momentum was gone. The rocket was out of fuel, and the accountants in Detroit were finally ready to plug the plug.
December 12, 2000. It was supposed to be a day of celebration for General Motors' 103rd year. But instead, it became a day of mourning. Rick Wagoner, the newly minted CEO of GM, stepped onto a stage in Detroit and dropped a bombshell that sent shockwaves through Lansing, Michigan, and the entire automotive world. General Motors was killing Oldsmobile. Wagoner cited a lack of profitability and the inability to find a sustainable niche for the brand. Despite investing billions into new models like the Aurora and the Intrigue, the market share had dwindled from 7% in the 80s to a meager 1.6%. The innovation division was no longer innovating, it was hemorrhaging cash. Oldsmobile didn't disappear overnight. GM announced a slow 4-year wind down. To give the brand a dignified exit, they created the Final 500 series. The last 500 units of each remaining model, the Alero, Aurora, Bravada, Intrigue, and Silhouette, would be produced in a special collector-grade trim. These cars were bathed in a unique dark cherry metallic paint. They featured cream leather interiors with Oldsmobile's heritage logos embroidered into the seats and floor mats. Each one carried a numbered plate marking its place in history. Interestingly, the Silhouette minivan never quite made it to 500.
Due to production capacity and fleet orders, only 360 final 500 silhouettes were actually built, making them some of the rarest Oldsmobiles ever made. April 29, 2004. The end of the road. Inside the Lansing plant, the atmosphere was surreal. For many workers, this wasn't just a job, it was a family tradition. Generations of Lansing residents had built Oldsmobiles. The very last car, the 35,229,918th Oldsmobile ever built, was a dark cherry Alero GLS. As it moved down the line, every worker who touched it signed their name. They signed under the hood, inside the trunk, and on the chassis. It was a physical testament to a century of American labor. When that Alero was driven off the floor, the RO Rocket officially landed. The oldest car brand in American history was gone. The car was originally sent to the R.E. Olds Transportation Museum, but in a final twist of corporate fate, it was later sold at auction in 2017 for $42,000. It remains a ghost of a lost empire, a reminder of what happens when a giant loses its way. Did Oldsmobile fail? On paper, yes, it ceased to exist. But the failure wasn't due to poor cars, it was a failure of identity. By making Oldsmobiles indistinguishable from Buicks and Pontiacs, GM robbed the brand of its innovation soul. If you can get the same car for less at a Chevy dealer, why buy an Olds? While the world was moving toward trucks and SUVs in the 90s, Oldsmobile stayed tethered to the sedan. By the time that Bravada arrived, the market was already dominated by Jeep and Ford. In its final 13 years, Oldsmobile had 6 different managers. There was no continuity, no long-term vision, just a series of panicked attempts to rebrand to a younger audience that didn't want what they were selling. Oldsmobile is gone, but its DNA is everywhere. Every time you drive an automatic car, you're using technology Oldsmobile pioneered in 1938. Every time a manufacturer uses a high-compression V8, they're following the path blazed by the Rocket 88. Oldsmobile was the first to show us that a car could be more than a machine. It could be a song, a rocket, a piece of art. It was the bridge between the horse and buggy and the jet age. The brand may be defunct, but the legend of the rocket remains in the hearts of those who remember when driving was merry and the horizon was something you chased in a car built by dreamers. The rocket has landed, but its echo still roars.